Dear friends, it is an enormous pleasure and honor to welcome our keynote speaker for this lunch, Ali Babacan, Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Turkey. A couple of years ago, we had as our title for this summit something to the effect of seizing opportunity in a dynamic region. This year's title is Doing Business in Turbulent Times, though it's still in a dynamic region. There's probably no better captain to navigate turbulence and the Turkish ship of state through these waters than Deputy Prime Minister Babacan. And these waters are troubled. One need only pick up the paper to appreciate the crucial value of Ali Babacan's leadership. You're going to have 3% plus growth this year, probably 3.3% growth. Just imagine if there weren't a stagnation of the European economy, if you didn't have the troubles that you have with ISIS across the border. It is nothing short of remarkable that the Turkish economy is as steady as it is in this neighborhood. Deputy Prime Minister Babacan is very much the architect of Turkey's economic success, described in some circles as the economy czar, though I don't really know where the word czar fits into Turkish history. It is to his credit that the country has experienced such spectacular a transformation over the past 10 years, a transformation that bears testament to his skills as a leader, his deft determination, and the word that our International Advisory Board Chairman likes to use so much, Brent Scowcroft, judgment. Judgment just always seems to be the key attribute of great leaders. Deputy Prime Minister Babacan is solidly respected among the world's most important economic decision makers in the G20, which Turkey will chair in 2015. Congratulations on that. And in fact, Deputy Prime Minister Babacan returned just a few days ago from the G20 meeting in Brisbane, and perhaps you'll give us a little bit of a readout from that experience, and also a readout about how you're going to face up to some of the struggles that you're facing both in the Eurozone and the region. He was appointed Deputy Prime Minister with responsible for the economy 2009, reappointed this September by Prime Minister Davutoglu. Prior to that, he served under Prime Minister Erdogan as Minister of State for the Economy 2002-2007 and as Foreign Minister 2007-2009. He's a Fulbright scholar and a graduate of Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Yet none of these raw biographical details come near to capturing his signature importance over the last few years. A core principle of his leadership and a key to Turkey's recent success is summarized in his own words, and I quote, "Having a complementary approach in foreign policy is opening new horizons for our business." Appropriate words given the theme of our summit. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, it's a pleasure to be working with you again this year. It's been a pleasure also to host you in Washington for events. He will deliver keynote remarks, after which I'll ask Nino dos Santos of CNN to join him on a stage to moderate a conversation with Mr. Babacan. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, Chairman of the Atlantic Council, President of the Atlantic Council, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here again with you all during the 6th Atlantic Council Energy and Economic Summit. And I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Atlantic Council and all those who supported this event here in Istanbul. After quite a few years now, this summit has become a very valuable and fruitful summit with a big contribution to our regional energy issues and also regional and global economic conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, as the next G20 president, Turkey is very much into the process of global economic and financial issues. We are a member of G20 from the very beginning, and 2 years ago we were elected to chair G20 in 2015. G20 first had ministerials. It was November 2002 when I attended the very first ministerial meeting of G20. But since the 2008-2009 crisis, there is also a leaders summit. Only after crisis, it was found to be important to have developed countries, but also major developing countries to sit around one table to have a candid conversation about what is really needed for global economy. It is quite representative. It is about 2/3 of the world's population. It is about 3/4 of the world's trade and about 85% of the world's GDP. So a big representation power, but also small enough to have a real conversation, not to just read 3-minute texts, but to have a real interaction among the leaders. So when we look at what we have in our agenda for next year, we are going to be putting a lot of emphasis on implementation. A lot of promises have been made, a lot of commitments have been made, especially for the financial sector. The regulation framework has been formed to a big extent through FSB, but now it is very important, we believe, that deeds, not just words, should appear. For the agenda items, what we are going to be involved with, growth is the most important agenda item. Sustainable, balanced, and strong growth. And for growth, all the G20 countries made commitments for reforms. The total number of specific commitments that the G20 countries have made are about 1,000. So there are 1,000 commitments already made, written, delivered, and we are going to be putting together an important monitoring mechanism to see how the implementation will work. And our approach will be deliver or explain approach. The IMF and OECD did a joint analysis that if the 20 countries deliver these 1,000 commitments, then in 5 years' time, the global economy will have an additional growth of 2.1%. That is the latest analysis of IMF and the World Bank. So if the 20 countries act in a coordinated way, in a complementary way, then it is possible to have higher amounts of growth. International financial architecture is another important subject. Investments and infrastructure. All the developed and developing countries are going to be very much interested in this subject, especially equity-based financing. PPPs are going to be important subjects to emphasize. And we are also going to be working with the World Bank very closely to have templates for PPP projects so that these projects will be standardized and it will be easier to securitize these projects. Financial regulation, which is probably one of the most successful outcomes of G20, having a global set of standards of banking regulation. International tax issues, development issues, climate change, employment issues, global trade, energy, and anti-corruption. These are important agenda items. These subjects are continuing. We are going to make sure that there is a seamless transition from Australian presidency to Turkish presidency, and then later on Chinese will take over from us. And we have a troika system to have the 3 countries together at the head of the table, because G20 doesn't have a secretariat, it doesn't have a permanent bureaucratic system. It is a voluntary and informal platform which is based on this troika structure. For our presidency, we are going to add two important new themes to G20. One of them is low-income developing countries. Yes, G20 represents 2/3 of the population, global population, but 1/3, we believe, should not be excluded and should be considered under each agenda item of G20. So whatever we discuss around the G20 table, we are going to be providing input from low-income developing countries so that whatever we decide around the G20 table is going to actually include their worries or their views as well. The second important subject which we are going to include is small to medium-sized enterprises. Right now for G20 we have the B20 structure, which is the large conglomerates. We have the L20, which is the union of workers working for those large companies. But SMEs are not really at the focus. Actually, for both developing countries and even most of the developed countries, SMEs are job creators. They are the source of entrepreneurship. They are the source of R&D innovation in most cases. So we want to make sure that the small to medium-sized enterprises find their place under every agenda item of G20. And both of these ideas have actually received a very positive approach from the other G20 members, and we have already started to do it. And also we have also discussed with ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, to launch the very first global SME forum. It will be launched during our presidency, but it will be a permanent structure to have a voice of SMEs worldwide, so that SMEs will be represented in different international contexts, and their problems, their suggestions will be more strongly voiced in a way. ICC loved the idea. We suggested them. They loved it, and they said we are launching it. They have membership in more than 100 countries, so this new SME forum under ICC is going to be a novelty for our presidency as well. G20 does have other structures like T20, think tanks, Y20, Youth 20, Girls 20, C20, Civil Network, and also we have got a suggestion to have a W20, Women Entrepreneurs. Many countries are saying that there are already too many 20s, so let's don't have any more. But so far we didn't have the courage to reject it outside. So we are just trying to voice it, talk with other G20 members, but we believe that it is a good idea, so that women entrepreneurs around 20 countries will have a voice for G20. We could do it formally, or at least we can do it informally if there is no consensus around G20, so we will see. But W20 is something which we would like to promote one way or another. We are going to have a leaders summit in November. We are going to have two finance ministers meetings plus central bank governors meetings. We are going to have a labor ministers meeting, trade ministers meeting, the very first agriculture ministers meeting for food safety, and a very first G20 ministerial meeting for energy ministers. So for the energy ministers, there are a couple of countries who are still hesitant, but if we are able to convince them, then I think it is going to be important to have the very first G20 energy ministers meeting, which we hope becomes a tradition. So this is more or less what we have in our minds for G20, but for energy issues especially, which is an important topic for this conference, we are going to also put a lot of emphasis on inclusiveness, because right now about 1/5 of the world's population do not have access to electricity, and about 2.6 billion people in the world still rely on traditional biomass for cooking. So access to energy for all, we believe, also should be an important theme for G20, and Atlantic Council, I believe, could have contribution to energy-related subjects that we are going to be discussing for G20. So this is more or less what we have in our mind. Then, of course, we don't have an easy process in front of us because the global economy is recovering only gradually. Maybe the worst is behind us. I think as of now we are more comfortable to say that worst is behind us. But then, especially in Europe, the growth is very weak, uneven, and very fragile. And also thinking about the deflation risks, high unemployment, aging population, European economy seems to be still quite a difficult case. European Central Bank is trying to do a lot, but under these circumstances, central banks can't create miracles. The right structural reforms are desperately needed in many European countries, and only through structural reforms from now on there could be a sustainable recovery. Otherwise, the situation doesn't really look good at all. On the other hand, US economy is actually growing at a more sustainable speed, and unemployment is dropping, which is good, but on the other hand, the labor force participation rate is at its 35 years lowest, and share of long-term unemployment is still very high. And we believe that Federal Reserve's moves throughout next year and 2016 is going to be very critical for the right timing and for the right dose of tightening, let's say. So, and we are happy that around the G20 table and other settings, all the major central banks, the reserve issuer central banks, are discussing among themselves thoroughly. And I am also hopeful that no central bank is living in an isolated situation. There is a lot of interaction going on, and I think all the central banks should be very careful about the spillover and spillback effects of what they are doing. For Japanese economy, unfortunately, the recent news are not good. Abenomics had good initial results. Medium to long-term results were really not known well. And Japan, unfortunately, got into an officially a recession. So we have to see what kind of new policy steps that are going to be introduced. But no matter which angle from we look at, especially for the developed countries, confidence is the key area that has to be concentrated. No matter what kind of monetary policies, no matter what kind of fiscal policies countries implement, if the element of confidence is not strong or if it is missing, then most of the time fiscal stimulus don't work and monetary easing doesn't work. So frequent change of governments, the political crisis, the social problems in many developed countries are actually putting a lot of burden on possible policy choices, and creating confidence, building confidence is not going to be an easy job. So being predictable is very important, providing medium-term, long-term targets, very important, fulfilling the commitments, fulfilling the promises, hitting the targets. These are very important to build confidence, and we will see how it is going to work out. For the developing countries, the growth rates have dropped, and it seems that for the next 10 years, the average growth will be lower than the last 10 years. But still, even this lower figure is going to be higher than the developed world. So the developing countries will continue to get higher and higher share in the global GDP. And despite all the rhetoric about the weaknesses or fragile countries or whatsoever, compared to the 1990s, during which we had crises around the world in different developing countries, right now, the developing countries have stronger public finances. Their public debt is much lower than the developed countries. Their banking systems are much stronger compared to 1990s. They have higher reserves. They have more flexible exchange rates, and also they have fresh experiences of crisis management, which is, I think, important in these circumstances. So, although with probably lower rates, the developing countries will be still the place of dynamism, the place of growth, and the place for doing business. From now on, growth quantity is important, but the quality is also going to be very important. US is, yes, now growing. We hope Europe follows. Developing countries are already, actually since 2008, 2009, they are showing a reasonable performance for growth. But how is the quality of this growth? And the quality has a lot to do with sustainability. Because if you just look at the growth of this year's figure, it may not tell much about next few years' growth. Only with high quality growth of today, we can have growth to come for next years. So financial sustainability of growth is very important. The growth is there, but is it sustainable? Are the countries' public debt allow for more growth, or the central bank's balance sheets, banks' balance sheets, or households' balance sheets, are these strong enough to sustain the growth in the future? These will be very important to follow. The social sustainability of growth is important. Growth is there, but if this is a jobless growth, then it is a problem. Is the growth actually helping the income to be more equally distributed, or is it just making the income distribution worse and worse? So if the growth only helps 1% of the population, then the social consequences should be considered very, very carefully. Environmental sustainability of growth, something which is almost totally ignored since 2008-2009 crisis. The growth is okay, but are we really taking adequate amount of care of global warming, climate change, or are we really looking carefully at the carbon emissions, freshwater sources? So we are growing today, but are we stealing from the growth of times of next generations? So this is also something I think very, very important, and we are happy about the recent developments. So the major polluters, let's say, have to be more cognitive about the possible negative global outcomes, and this can be handled only with a truly international global collaboration. If only half of the countries have an effort and the rest don't, it is still not a good outcome, still everyone suffers, so we have to be very careful. So these are going to be important subjects to be discussed next year during our presidency, but also for many years to come. Specifics about Turkey. Turkey has been going through a very important transformation process. Since 2002, there has been an enormous change economically, socially, politically, and we have been doing a lot of reforms to strengthen our democratic system, to improve our practices of rights, freedoms, rule of law. So a lot has been done on the political reform process, but we still have a long to-do list. And we are trying to improve step by step on all these fronts, and the EU process has been very helpful to us, and it will continue to be helpful. So no matter what kind of the economic situation we are observing in the European Union, we believe that all the political criteria, the political standards of the European Union are very important. They are top-notch, and for a country to be assessed in an objective way, whether the human rights practices, freedoms practices, or how the democracy functions and so forth, if it is good or not, how is the quality of democracy, how is the quality of rule of law, then still the EU benchmarks are very, very important, and we are going to be continuing to work very closely with the European Commission to make sure that we are continuing to perform well and increase our standards all the way through. The economic transformation has been also quite stellar in Turkey. We have done a lot of reforms before 2008-2009 crisis hit. We have done our banking reform, we have done our healthcare reform, social security reform. We reduced our budget deficit from 12% down to a 1% surplus actually in just 4 years. So I'm talking about 2000 to 2006. And when the crisis hit, we already had strong public finances and we already had strong banking sector. So none of our banks had any kind of problems throughout the crisis. And also, since we had already a low budget deficit or a strong fiscal situation, public debt in Turkey was never a source of concern. You have been hearing a lot of debt crisis, especially associated with many European countries, but Turkey never had any kind of a debt crisis or whatsoever throughout the 2008-2009 crisis or after that period. As a result, our GDP, which was $230 billion in 2002, was $822 billion last year, so more than actually tripled the GDP during this time. And we have become one of the top 10 countries when you look at the agricultural GDP. We have become also the world's 6th country when we look at the number of tourists visiting us. We have our PPP adjusted per capita income is now around $19,000, which means more than half of the European averages and more than half of Japan. So in terms of the overall welfare in the country, the improvement was quite significant. And what is more, our Gini coefficient is dropping. So not only Turkey is growing, but this, the benefits of this growth is more and more equally distributed among our population. Actually, across the OECD, Turkey is the only country which decreased its Gini coefficient at the fastest rate. There are 5 countries in OECD where the Gini coefficient is dropping, but Turkey has the fastest dropping rate. That is the adequate phrasing. So, which is important. We don't have the lowest Gini, but the rate of drop is the fastest. So that is probably how to put it. And we used to be a low middle income country, and now we are officially in the upper middle income category of the World Bank. And we have just $2,000 to go in terms of the per capita income to reach to high income category. So, and also again, according to the World Bank, the middle class, the size of the middle class in Turkey literally doubled over the last 10 years. This is from their recent report. And also the growth in Turkey is a job creating growth. Since 2009, 5.7 million additional jobs have been created. Just last 12 months, 1.2 million additional jobs were created. So the job creation is also going at quite a fast rate, but on the other hand, our labor force participation rate is increasing, especially for women. For men, we had the 70% participation rate. For women, we had 30% participation rate. But for the newcomers, for the last 3 years, out of every 100 new jobs created, 46 are women and 54 are men. So we have this very significant shift over the last 3 years, during which the women are now more entering to our labor force, which was actually what we intended in 2009 when we introduced a positive discrimination for women to join to our workforce. We actually reduced the cost of entry for women to the workforce, and that incentive actually has worked very well. Our economy has become a much more open economy. We increased our exports from $36 billion in 2002 to $160 billion this year. And FDI inflow to Turkey is much higher than it used to be before 2002. We wish, of course, much higher figures, but since the European economy is not really doing well, 70% of the FDI inflow is actually from Europe for Turkey, and our numbers are still not really at the levels that we want them to see. When we look at the recent reforms that we have introduced, since the 2011 elections, we have now a brand new commercial code written from scratch, a brand new code of obligations, code on court procedures, capital markets law. When you add them up, it is about 3,000 articles of law passed through the parliament. We have a new insurance regulation, a new natural disasters law, a new private pension system. Now we have almost 5 million people joined to the system voluntarily. And we have also new projects which are already implemented for entrepreneurs like business angels or fund of funds and so forth. Istanbul has become a real business hub. Now, not just for Turkey, but for an entire region. Many multinational companies or financial institutions, international financial institutions are now picking Istanbul as their regional hub. For example, World Bank's private sector arm, IFC, has its office in Istanbul for Eastern Europe, North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, and so forth. EBRD's, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, their Istanbul office is a regional office. European Investment Bank's Istanbul office is a regional office. Or companies like Microsoft, Intel, they have already picked Istanbul as their regional hub for 60, 70, 80 countries or so. Companies like Coca-Cola has their Istanbul headquarters for more than 90 countries, including all the Africa, Russia, Eastern Europe, all the way to India, including India. So the easy access plays a role. Turkish Airlines now fly to 108 countries, which ranks them #1 globally. We are now building the world's largest airport in Istanbul with an ultimate capacity of 150 million. Construction already started, first phase to be completed end of 2017. And at the end of at the end of first phase, the capacity will be like 70, 80 million or so. But at the end of the 4 stages of construction, the capacity will be ultimately 150. Our access to Africa is increasing very fast. We used to have only 12 embassies 5 years ago. Now we have 38 embassies functioning in Africa. We used to have only 6 embassies in Latin America. Now we have 12. In ASEAN, we have now embassies in every single Southeast Asian country except Laos, and Laos embassy is functioning next year. So the diplomatic representation, trade offices, TICA offices, our International Cooperation Agency offices are now all around the world. And Turkey last year spent $3.3 billion for official development aid. And again, we are right now the world's 3rd largest humanitarian aid provider after US and UK. So this international exposure of Turkey has become really an important subject, and we are always looking for partnerships, cooperation, win-win outcomes. Although our immediate neighborhood is not in a very comfortable situation nowadays, we do have serious problems in Syria, in less so probably in Iraq. Ukraine, Russia is really a risky subject when we look at the geopolitics, but Turkey is continuing to grow. Business is continuing. Last year our growth rate was 4.1%. This year we are expecting to have 3.3% of growth. Actually, this growth has been deliberately brought to 3.3%. Last year we have taken many measures to, in a way, contain the domestic demand, because our banks are so sourceful and they are very eager to lend, and our young population, growing population, very eager to spend. And we have observed that borrowing and spending was going too fast, and we have taken measures actually so that people spend what they make, but they don't just borrow and spend, which could be eventually a risky situation for the households and also a risky situation eventually for the bank's balance sheets as well. So this year the car sales in Turkey dropped about 20%, and it's a good thing because 80% of the cars are imported cars, so we brought new macroprudential measures so that the car sales are eased down and payment terms are made more difficult. So, as I said at the beginning, sustainability is key. So, not just how much we grow this year, but how much we are going to be growing for 5 years, 10 years to come is the most important perspective. And as the ruling party, as the government, we have the luxury of thinking long term. Unfortunately, many countries don't have that luxury. Predictability is a problem. Political arena is not easy in many countries. We are observing very frequent changes of governments and ministers and so forth. So when we talk about 2023 targets for Turkey, our population believes in it. And the markets have a confidence with it. That is a very, very important difference between what we are doing and what successful countries are doing versus what some countries are not able to do because of the social or political circumstances. So we are putting a lot of emphasis on predictability, and we have already launched our new medium-term program, refreshed medium-term program, and we have already announced our structural reform agenda for the next term until 2018. 25 areas of reforms, and under each area we are announcing specific actions. The specific actions listed, the responsible authority is listed, and the deadline of delivering is listed. 1,250 actions in 25 areas. 417 already announced by our Prime Minister, and before the end of this year we are going to be announcing all the 1,250 actions, so that it will be transparent and it will be easy to follow, because we are showing which minister or which authority is responsible, and we are putting a deadline of that action being completed. If we are successful at delivering all these promises, then Turkish growth will be much higher, and also this high growth rate will be even much more sustainable. So as we are emphasizing structural reforms around the G20 table, we are also emphasizing structural reforms for ourselves in Turkey as well. So I don't want to get into the details of this, but a huge area that we are announcing, but two more subjects which we want to work on and which we want to improve ourselves are education and judiciary. Very, very important for us for the sustainability of growth and also for our economy. Only with better educated people we can actually have higher growth rates from now on, and only with a better judicial system we can have better levels of trust and confidence to the future of the country. For energy-specific issues, I'm sure you have been discussing a lot already yesterday and also today, but Turkey is a very important hub now for energy, and many, many pipelines already operational, being built. We want to diversify our energy sources, but we want to help Europe to diversify as well. Our new deals with northern Iraq and with Azerbaijan, very important for oil and gas purposes. We don't have our own resources, unfortunately, very, very limited. But by having our new agreements with our neighbors, Turkey will have better energy security, not just for herself, but also helping Europe as well. So maybe I should stop here and allow some time for questions, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much, Minister Babacan. That was a fascinating insight into Turkey, where you want to take Turkey from here, but also the G20 presidency and what you've got on your agenda. Because we only have a short period of time here, I'd like to also remind our guests in the room that I will be opening things up to the audience for discussion after the first couple of questions. The usual house rules apply. Questions rather than comments would be appreciated. Please tell us who you are, and please also stick to topic. That would be very much appreciated. You can also get in touch via Twitter to put through some questions. So, the G20 agenda, that's a great opportunity for Turkey to set the scene, but 2% of GDP growth and 1,000 reforms, that's an awful lot to chew over.
Well, actually, it is in 5 years' time. But when you look at the global economy, the size of the global economy, and in 5 years' time, 2% means quite a significant amount. And of course, we should also think about the risks of stagnation or even falling back. So in order to keep up the momentum for growth, or even to set a higher target, we believe is going to be important. And it's not just us, but also international institutions like OECD, IMF, they actually did analysis that is possible.
Well, let's delve straight into some of those international institutions, and particularly some of the trade bodies as well. One of the most interesting things that's been said by your Prime Minister is that you're quite keen on having multilateral trade negotiations rather than bilateral trade negotiations. And what we saw with the Australian presidency of the G20 is that we had a lot of simultaneous bilaterals happening. So why the departure? Where are you going to go with this?
Actually, this is an unexplored area, which means that there are so many bilateral arrangements around the world, so many FTAs bilateral, that are these bilateral agreements actually making small compartments of trade, but actually hurting the global trade freedom or not? So that's something which we want to more analyze, and we are going to be working with WTO and with OECD to make an analysis. But our approach here is that, what we are saying is that the bilateral trade agreements and multilateral trade agreements, this should be done in a coordinated way. So only with a much better coordinated approach, we believe that the global trade will continue to grow, and this will help eventually global growth as well. When you look at the growth of global trade, the pace is only half of the pace what we have observed before 2008, 2009. So the global trade growth is unfortunately going at very low figures. So we believe in free trade. We believe that if the goods move in a free way from one country to another, if people move in a free way from one country to another, if finance flows, if energy flows from one country to another in a free way, this is a win-win outcome for all the countries involved.
Just delving further into this issue of sort of multilateral trade negotiations, we've got the TTIP going on, we've got the TPP, we've got these enormous trade negotiations going on around the world, and some people have been saying for a long time, actually, the whole multilateral approach, the world has moved on from that. Will it not take a certain amount of convincing for some of your G20 partners to try and get back onto a multilateral approach here?
First of all, we are fully supportive of both TPP and TTIP, especially after the 2008-2009 crisis. Protectionism, unfortunately, has been a very serious problem, and it has been also a very easy exit for local politics. Whenever there's a crisis, it is very easy for politicians to blame something outside the country, because of this, we are now in this bad situation also. So, and you just raise the custom tariffs and import duties whatsoever, and pretend as if you are doing a good thing. But this ultimately hurts. So TPP and TTIP, especially after the crisis mood, are historical moves. And we appreciate both Europeans and the US administration for starting this. We hope it is finalized soon, but we don't want to be excluded. We want to be in the mechanism. Turkey is the only country which is in customs union with the EU, and if the US and the EU are now entering this very important investment and trade partnership, then Turkey should be part of it. So that's all what we want. And on the Pacific side, TPP is going on well, and I observe a very good momentum for all the countries which signed up to it. And eventually, I think the world will be a better place if TPP and TTIP is implemented eventually.
Moving on from trade negotiations to the real elephant in the room, which is obviously oil prices, the energy markets. We're here to talk about energy and the economy, and the oil price is literally tanking. Now, to a certain extent, that would be a win for Turkey, wouldn't it? Because of the current account deficits that you've been suffering from over the last few years. How is the low oil price affecting you at the moment?
Well, Turkey is a country which is highly dependent on energy imports, oil, gas, and partially coal as well. And because of the high growth and high industrialization in the country, the energy needs are growing at a very fast rate. But this is hurting our balance of payments. So the oil was at about $20 in 2002, and it peaked to 150. And every $10 decrease in oil prices helps us 0.5% of GDP in terms of current accounts deficit, and 0.5% in terms of inflation. So lower oil prices helps us. But we cannot rely on this forever. I mean, we cannot just say that, oh, good, oil prices have dropped, so we don't have to do anything. That's not the case. It can always come back. So we have to strengthen our fundamentals. We have to reduce our import dependency. We have to switch to more renewable energy, more local sources. We have to start operating our 2 nuclear plants, maybe the 3rd, maybe the 4th one, within the next 10 years' time. And we have to put also a lot of emphasis of energy efficiency, how to use energy in a wiser way. So these are all in our agenda, and we are working very hard to make sure that our dependency gets lower.
What you keep hearing from the investment community outside of Turkey, particularly in London where I work, is they're concerned about the exposure to, you talked about how Turkey isn't usually indebted, but you are exposed in foreign denominations here to the currency swings. What can you do to change that?
Well, actually, when you look at the government finances, our external debt has already been zeroed out in terms of the net foreign debt, but we have a surplus of like $30 billion or so. So the state, the government sector, has already paid down its external debt, and the net debt is not zero, but it's positive already. But our private sector's foreign currency debt has increased. In order to finance our current accounts deficit, it was mostly our banks and corporates borrowing from abroad, and that's how our current account has been financed. So in order to make this a sustainable path, we have to make sure that our current accounts deficit stays under control. And we are no longer talking about a public debt sustainability in Turkey, but we are talking about the external debt of private sector sustainability in Turkey. That is now the focus, and many structural reforms, the monetary policy, fiscal policy, and macroprudential measures are targeted towards that area.
Which I'm sure will be crucial if you're focusing on small to medium-sized enterprises. Let's start out, without further ado, by taking a few questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and a microphone will come towards you. I believe we have one at the back there.
Dan Dombey, Financial Times. Hello, Deputy Prime Minister. When you talk, you echo or in fact preempt many of the concerns of the private sector, of investors and Turkish executives as well. They all say that the most important issues for Turkey's future and prospects are what you said, rule of law, education, structural reform. So how do you deal with the perception out there that when it comes to rule of your law, since the events of December 17th last year...
I'm sorry, I missed your last 2 sentences.
Sorry. So everyone emphasizes what you emphasized.
Yeah.
Rule of law, education, structural reform. How then do you deal with the perception out there that when it comes to rule of law, Turkey's actually taken several backward steps since the corruption investigations were started on December the 17th of last year? That when it comes to education, the education reform that stands out is what the President spoke about this week, which is the increase in children going to Islamic schools from 60,000 or so a decade ago to 930,000 today. Schools where he says people will be encouraged to suggest, to question whether Muslims went to America before Columbus. And when it comes to institutional reform, although you've come out with this program, the most important issues, labour reform and tax reform, will be after the election, not before. They'll be jammed tomorrow rather than bread today. Thank you.
Let's stick, if I may, to the economics that we're here to talk about. I'm sure you can...
it was raising 3 issues that the Deputy Prime Minister
brought up. Economics. I will ask Mr. Babacan to answer the economic sides of those questions, if you may. Thank you. I'm sure you'll have a chance to ask the sides that aren't economics on the sidelines.
Okay. Well, actually, Daniel was not able to ask me questions for a very long time, so he has a big backlog of questions. So that's that's totally understood. Well, first of all, in terms of our judicial system, since December, we have gone through quite a peculiar series of events, and a lot of this had to do a group of people who were somehow embedded in our judicial system started to act in a coordinated way, not following the laws or not following the principles of being independent and also being fair. So when we had this group of people within our judicial system, it really hurt the credibility. So that if judges and prosecutors all of a sudden started to get instructions from a network which they feel belonging to, then we can no longer have a trust to the judicial system. So what we have to do, and which we have already started to do, is make sure that our judicial system is free of such group movements or whatsoever. I don't want to maybe get into specifics. I think most of the audience probably understand what I am trying to tell, but what we want is a judicial system which acts in an independent way and also in a fair way, and only following the law and only following the universal principles of rule of law. And we have our international references. Our international references are the Council of Europe, the European Union's standards, and of course UN's principles when we look at whatever we talk about law. So we believe that it is extremely important for Turkey to be truly a state of law if we want to become an advanced economy, if we want to become a first-class democracy. We know the problems, and this reform will take some time. We are going to be hiring a lot of new judges and prosecutors, and we are trying to renew the system with a set of important steps, and we are going to be also working closely with the European Commission, with which we are continuously getting feedback about how we are performing in that area. For education, we have already increased the compulsory education time in Turkey from 8 years to 12 years. That was an important step. And we have already renewed the curriculum, and now we are working on a brand new teachers strategy, so that how can we pick good teachers, how can we train them better, and how we can measure their performance and award them accordingly. So this is something which is being worked on by our Ministry of Education. And whenever it's about education, also we believe that our students should have options. There are some compulsory courses, but there are options. And those options are important for the families and the children to decide together to follow. So we know what is ideal, we know where we should be heading, but we have to find the right path to reach the destination. Two important areas, very detrimental to the faith of our democracy and to the faith of our economy.
And also the issue of corruption, I'm sure, will come up when you have the presidency of the G20, because it'll be a significant issue that will need to be tackled, not just domestically, but
it is
right around the emerging markets.
It is one of the 11 subjects
How
of
high
G20. In the G20 agenda from country to country it changes, not only for us, but for many countries. This is an important area, but Turkey has been moving up in terms of the transparency indicators. We are not perfect, we know it, but there is improvement. And we are going to be taking more steps for better transparency and better effort to fight against corruption allegations. We know that, and also the name of our political party is AK, and it means white, clean, spotless. And that is one of the main reasons of existence of the ruling party. So we cannot tolerate, and whenever there are cases, the cases will be investigated, And also we are going to make sure that the structural steps are also there. But transparency is the easiest and the most effective way. So doing things in a more transparent way, in a more merit-based way. If there is a potential, if there is opportunity, there should be equal access, equal opportunity to reach those. So we know what is needed, but probably some time is needed to implement.
And probably communicate the decision as well. Let's take those two questions at the same time. Gentleman at the front, and then there's a gentleman at the back. And a lady over here. I'll take 3 questions.
Thank you very much. I'm Luis Henrique Fonseca, Ambassador, Consul General of Brazil in Istanbul. Congratulations, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, for your wonderful summing up of the last G20 group meeting. I have a very specific question in terms of energy and economics. You know that Brazil is an exporter and an importer of oil. But for more than 40 years, we have been producing a very clean biofuel, which is ethanol. In Brazil, you produce it from sugar cane. In the United States, from corn. As in Turkey, corn is very good and very easily produced. Would Turkey consider the possibility of producing ethanol from corn, and also to have all these big factories of vehicles here producing cars able to use both fuels? Thank you.
Thank you. And then, sorry, I'll just take 2 more questions because apparently we're very tight for time, and let's see whether some of them overlap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, I wanted to ask how much of a drain on your economy and growth is the presence of all these refugees from Syria? And I know that your government has called upon the United States to establish a no-fly zone, a refuge for displaced people within Syria. Has Turkey prepared detailed plans about how it would help facilitate creation of such a no-fly zone and a refuge in Syria? Thank you.
And ever so briefly.
Yeah. Sayın Babacan, on top of everything, you mentioned that Istanbul is going to be a financial center, financial hub. And I know that the G20 presidency is one of the most important occasions to improve Turkey's rankings and global doing business indices. Do you have a plan? Do you have a roadmap all along the G20 presidency? And also, do you think that Istanbul might be a financial center as long as this energy stock exchange is concerned? Thank you.
Okay, great. Shall we start out with the issue that is geopolitical here, that's obviously on the border of your country, and the G20 will push you to deal with it, the issue of Syria and Iraq?
Well, first of all, for biofuel, actually we had a meeting with President Rousseff just a week ago in Australia, and we really appreciate what Brazil has been doing to introduce different modalities of fuel and reduce carbon emissions. In Turkey, we do produce biofuel through sugar cane, not sugar beet, I'm sorry, from sugar beet, which is unfortunately a more expensive way of doing it. But for gasoline, we can only up to 5% or so of the mix. And for diesel fuel, biofuel agricultural products, which are mostly produced in tropical climates, is not so suitable for our climate. Although we have an effort and we are trying different ways, so far we are able to introduce the biofuel for gasoline, but not yet for diesel, which seems to be more expensive for us. But it's an important area which we have to be careful about. There is always a trade-off, I would say, between the costs and greener or cleaner forms of energy. And under the G20, actually the subject is financing the climate change. So it is more about financing of it that we are discussing, and how especially developing countries will we have access to low cost, good terms of financing to do what is necessary to fight against climate change. That's an important subject that is under the agenda already. Now for the issue about refugees, we do have about 1.6 million. About 220,000 of them live in camps. They chose to live in camps because we let them free to do what they want, and the rest have been dispersed to different cities. But because of strong relations between Turkey and Syria in terms of the population, there are families living across the border and so forth. Many of them found their relatives or friends around the country, and they are somehow surviving. But we are offering all the healthcare and education facilities and programs for all the guests that we have from Syria. So far, we have spent about $4 billion or so in terms of the cumulative cost of what we have done. It is okay for us. It is a serious problem, but I think the problem is even more serious for countries like Lebanon or Jordan, where the number of refugees is a much higher percentage of their population. So far, we were able to cover the costs mostly by our own means. There has been very little international contribution to what is going on. And in terms of the no-fly zone and also a security zone for Syria, we are talking about this with our friends and allies. We believe that it is necessary, and we believe that it is a way of bringing more security and hopefully stability at one point for Syria. But how to do it, when to do it, does need thorough discussions with our friends and allies, which is not an easy subject. And for the last question about Istanbul as a financial center, this is becoming more and more a reality. Maybe it was a dream when we announced it in 2009. We have already delivered our action plan, which covered the period until 2014. And now we are refining our action plan for the next 4 years about what is still needed to be done. But at the end of the day, for a good financial center, it is important to have good regulations, predictability, and most important of all, trust. And that is something which takes time to build on, but I think we are taking the right kind of steps, and Istanbul is already functioning as an important hub for trade investments and ultimately for finance as well. And for the World Bank's doing business study, Turkey had, compared to 2002, we are now at a much better situation, but we still have to do a lot to make Turkey an easier and easier place to invest. For all the sectors, I think energy, which is the subject of this conference mostly, energy is actually seems to be the most difficult sector to invest nowadays in Turkey. Because of some structural problems, because of some human resources problems and so forth, we are aware of it. But with our Minister of Energy, with our other ministers, we are working hard now to set up new legal frameworks to make it easier for investors to operate in Turkey. A lot, again, has to do with predictability, for security of regulation, so that when we do a regulation, it lasts for some time, so that we don't confuse people by switching things too often. We are aware of the problems, but I think we need to do. But other than energy, I think most sectors, including especially the financial sector, the investment conditions in Turkey have improved a lot. And actually just recently, a very important deal was announced so that one of the most important global banks in Turkey has now got a controlling share of one of the largest private banks of Turkey, and that's just a deal which was, I think, announced 2 days ago or so. So our financial sector has been receiving a lot of FDI inflow because the regulation is very predictable, and our authorities have done a great job over the last 12 years of financial sector regulation, supervision, and making sure that rule of law really works, and it has worked, I think, at a quite big extent when we look at the financial sector.
Deputy Prime Minister Ali Babacan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful discussion. I will now hand it back over to Frederick Kempe to make some closing remarks.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to make two housekeeping notes, and then on behalf of the Chairman of the Atlantic Council, John Huntsman, Atlantic Council, myself, I have a presentation also for Deputy Prime Minister Babacan. Two housekeeping notes. The next session, we delayed the start because this one's running a little longer. Next session begins at 3:30 in the Tarabia room up the stairs on the first floor. The rollout of the report entitled Completing Europe from the North-South Corridor to Energy, Transportation, Telecommunications Union. General Jones will be up there with the CEO of Lotos, Pavel Olekhnevich. The second announcement, with some added color from a conversation I had with Mr. Babacan. We're going to dinner tonight at the Shweda Club. That means Water Island. This is the only island in the Bosporus. I'm informed by Mr. Babacan that it is the only place where you can be in neither Europe nor Asia. You're in both at the same time. So it's a great experience for all of you. We're going to depart the hotel. Ferries will depart the hotel en route to the island at 6 p.m. So you have to be downstairs at 5:40 p.m. to take the ferry. If you don't want to ride the ferries, there's a bus that then connects to a shorter shuttle boat that departs at 5:45. And wear your credentials, wear your badge this evening. And now to the presentation. On the 6th year of our summit here, Mr. Babacan, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, we want to salute your leadership and your partnership with something we do very rarely at the Atlantic Council, and that is to bestow on you an honorary lifetime membership. I think the way you answered Daniel's question from the FT underscores what we're actually trying to do at this summit, and that is we're not only always going to be in agreement, but this is the place where a very civilized debate can take place on any range of issues, and we really want this to continue to be a place where that kind of thing can occur. So let me read the certificate, and also if I can invite you up to the podium to give it to you. The Atlantic Council extends its profound appreciation to His Excellency Ali Babacan and bestows upon him this honorary lifetime Atlantic Council membership. As a leading Turkish statesman of strategic vision, he has personified the commitment of the Turkish people and their republic to the shared Euro-Atlantic values of individual freedom, mutual security, and free markets. He recognized the role that the Atlantic Council could play in showcasing the power of Turkey's example through its annual Energy and Economic Summit of business and government leaders in Istanbul. With his sustained support for this initiative, he has helped build an enduring testament to Turkey's dynamic role spanning East and West. Please join me in a round of applause for Deputy Prime Minister Ali Babacan. Thank you so much. We hope to see you on Water Island this evening. Thank you.
It's great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. No, I know. That's the shame.